This morning. We may have a few more folks trickling in as the minutes after 9 tick by. I want to say thank you and welcome to Suzanne Groneman this morning from the city of Reno, who is here to tell us about the carbon and methane emissions contributing our part to curbing climate change. How will we reduce the urban heat island effect in our community to curb its impact on our citizens' health? And how will the Nevada Green Business Network help us reach our goals? Suzanne is the Sustainability Program Manager for the City of Reno and serves on the Board of Trustees of Impact Nevada, Nevada Sustainability Alliance. This morning's reading comes from, I'll help you just a second. We got to wear Minnie Mouse. Hang on one second. Let me help. We got Here you go. 1, 2. Okay. This morning's reading is from Dawn Star Sarah's Borchelt. It is called Tangled. Knit 6, purl 6, sets of 2 rows, 4 rows, 6 rows up to 12 patterns, repeating steady, soothingly same. This is not what life is like. Life is like picking up a tousled hunk of yarn pulled out of the basket by an impatient child looking for a string too many times. You find an end, you follow the thread for a while, and sooner or later you hit a tangle, knots and twists and loops all mixed up together. Sometimes I sit there and untangle it, pulling little by little until I have one piece stretched out and can go on to the next one. Sometimes I grab a pair of scissors and cut. Enough, I only needed a little anyway. But sometimes I hold the tangle in my hand, amazed for a moment at the complexity, the mess. I look at it and think, this can't be solved. It just is. There are patterns, connections, confusing ones, frustrating ones, the thread turning back on itself as life also does. The tangled things will always be here in this moment I am living through, right now, whatever comes after. Even if I work through this, even if I cut the cord and walk away, look at the tangled knot in the yarn, look at how it hurts. And so I have lost my lighters, but the UUA has this app and they have a chalice lighter for us. So I will light the chalice. All right. So with that, Suzanne, feel free, take it away. Folks, we are going to have a question and answer session at the end. If you need to, you can drop your questions in the chat and we will get to them at the end so that way you don't forget about them. Otherwise, just hold them till the end.
Okay, so I said we would have no problem sharing, so let's hope I was correct. All right, so everybody can see this full screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to minimize the other one so it doesn't throw me off here. So when I sat down to put this presentation together, I thought there's no one slide where I can say, this is how urban heat island is addressed. This is how this is addressed. And so what I thought I would do is kind of give an overview of the city's priorities, our sustainability program, where we are today. We just had a big announcement last week that some of the folks on the call, I recognize the names, probably already know about, but and how that process kind of helped shape our next steps. And I should back up and reintroduce myself. I'm Suzanne Groneman. I'm the Sustainability Program Manager. I've just been informed that title is going to change slightly to Sustainability Manager, probably just easier. I think we no longer view it as just a program. And so that's some good news. So that's gonna change here soon. So I will dive right in. I like to frame presentations sometimes with just a little bit about like me. We see me in a professional setting, but kind of what some of my interests are. So this first picture is my husband and I do a lot of like off-grid camping. This was actually at Pyramid in the winter, which a lot of people think we're crazy. That's why I'm so bundled up. I'm actually wearing his jacket in that picture because I didn't even bring enough stuff for myself. So, but I enjoy all the same outdoor activities, and I'm sure a lot of us do. Snowshoeing, fishing. That one's just a funny picture. That's way back up, kind of off of, it's near Story County. I don't know if anybody's been out there, but there's these rocks, this one rock formation that's very red. So we were out there kind of in the middle of nowhere, and I thought I have to do one of those pictures, where you jump off the rock and somebody snaps a photo. So I do a lot of outdoor activities, spend a lot of time with my family. I have a lot of dogs. I have a new puppy. If you hear any yapping in the background during this presentation, that would be him. And a little bit about me on the professional side. So I am a graduate of UNR. I worked previous to working at the city, at the state of Nevada. I was there for 6 years as a renewable energy and sort of green finance program manager under Governor Sandoval. I was responsible for clean green finance, was there when state legislation for CPACE was passed and some other programs. I worked with the governor, I worked with the legislature. Moved on now got hired over at the city of Reno, strictly to focus on energy needs, and have been in the sustainability manager role for about 3 years now. And I work with our council, our citizens, our manager. I do a lot of activities like this, public presentations. I furthered my education at Stanford. I have a certificate in what's called G-Pro, which is essentially green professional, and that's an operations and maintenance certificate. I'm on the board of directors of Impact NV. And I assume that my education is only going to continue to grow as new technologies come in, and this world that we live in continues to change. So the goal of the sustainability program is really just to establish well-focused initiatives that promise to strengthen our reputation as one of the leading cities in the United States, while also improving the quality of life for all of our residents. And to answer those questions that came up about urban heat island and all that, we'll go into all the different parts that are sort of required to do that. So the city of Reno, I wanted to highlight some of our achievements. We are what's called a Soul Smart Silver certified community, which means we have all of the pieces in place to make it easier for somebody to go solar. And so that's sort of a check on our permitting process, how long it takes. Do we have financing programs available? So there's multiple areas where we can achieve points. And last year we were Soul Smart Silver out of silver, gold, and platinum. So we have work to do to make it even easier to maybe reach gold or platinum level. We're also part of the National BPS Coalition, which stands for Building Performance Standards. And you may have seen last week, the federal government actually passed a federal building performance standard for all of their buildings. So that's more than just designing them to be efficient. It's looking at existing building stock and making sure that they're consistently meeting this standard. And if they're not, then investing in those buildings to make sure that they do meet that standard. We also are a United States Conference of Mayors Climate Protection Award winner in 2021. And that was and I'll go over it a little bit more in my next slide, but that was for a very specific effort that we are still undertaking today. And then just last week, we were officially certified as a LEED Gold city under LEED for cities and communities. There is now a process where an entire city can look at not just what we're doing, but what's available in the community. So it's everything from transportation, management, access to transit, water quality, water management. Those aren't all things that we necessarily oversee. So it was a big data gathering exercise. And what it means to have achieved gold is we're doing a very good job. The levels there are silver, gold, and platinum. It's very hard to get platinum, but we are right there at gold. We jumped 2 certification levels in 5 years. And so hopefully we'll get to platinum maybe over the next 5 years. So the award that we won in 2021 was for essentially tracking our operational greenhouse gas emissions, which to some sounds like, which you can sort of do from maybe collecting energy or bills from your utility or getting your reports from waste management and tracking your waste impact. But we wanted to do more than that. We wanted to not only put them all in one place and sort of synthesize this data from natural gas, electricity, fleet, waste generation, put it all in one place, synthesize it, and then start to use that to actually inform kind of our next steps and have a better understanding of where we're doing well and maybe where we're not doing so well. And we still use this platform. It's a Reno based company called N0. And this clip here was, we were featured in a magazine called The Municipal for that effort. So if you want to look it up, you could Google the Municipal City of Reno greenhouse gas emissions tracking. You can find that article. So our city priorities, our council has prioritized infrastructure, climate change, and environmental sustainability in their sort of top tier priorities. So any effort I undertake, I have to make sure it also aligns with our overall strategic plan, which is pretty easy to say. It aligns. Pretty much anything I do is addressing sort of these three pieces. So it's great that the council has prioritized that. They kind of revamped. There's actually a new strategic plan out now where they made it more front and center than it used to be. It used to kind of be buried in our strategic plan. And I'm going to pause 1 second. So we have this overarching strategic plan at the city. Well, then we also have a sustainability plan, and that passed in 2019, in July of 2019. And under that plan, there's 9 priorities. I'm only going to talk about a few of them today to specifically address some of the questions that had come up. But those are basically priority number 1, lead by example, which I think we've been doing a pretty good job of. We're going to do something first, like we're going to put a more strict building performance standard on ourselves than we're going to put on the community. We're going to figure out, how best to put a solar project together before we try to educate the community. We are taking those steps first and really addressing our own operation. And then our other priorities are anything from from transitioning to clean and renewable energy to zero waste to safeguarding our water resources. So I'm going to touch on just a few of those so you can understand kind of what the city's doing specifically on those topics. I think it's easiest to frame our efforts in sort of 3 succinct strategies. So are we reducing the cause? Are we reducing the harm? Or are we restoring the environment? Because sometimes they all get convoluted, or sometimes, and I think you have to do all 3 to take action. And sometimes it's like, no, we should be only focusing on transportation. We should only be focusing on solar. We should only be focusing on trees, but you kind of have to do all of them. And so whenever I think of a new project or a new program, I kind of try to put it through one of these lenses and which one are we actually doing. So this is actually one of the slides I was putting together sort of last minute this morning. What our sustainability plan sets forth to do is reduce community-wide greenhouse gas emissions 28% by 2025 and 40% by 2030. So this is just a line chart showing where we are today. So when we first measured in 2014, you can see we were at about 2.75 million metric tons community-wide. In 2020, it looks like we had this huge, we were doing great. Well, in 2020, we were faced with something called COVID, and the transportation sector was non-existent. And if you pull transportation data, you can actually see this huge drop. It actually said since 2014, we had dropped 26% or something. Well, I knew that probably wasn't accurate. So I looked at 2021, and you can see it kind of ticks back up, but the overall trend line is a decline. We will fall short of our 2025 goal a little bit, especially if the transportation sector kicks back up before 2025, which I expect it will, because even in 2021, there was still a decline in incoming and outgoing and traffic moving throughout the community. So unless we do more or focus strictly on the transportation sector, we may see an actual jump up. So priority number 2 under our sustainability plan is expanding clean renewable energy. And from the city's perspective, we can support it, we can promote it. But what are other sort of creative ways that we can increase it in the community. And so here I've just touched on a few bullet points of actions that we have taken. So for example, converting 90% of our streetlights to LEDs by 2025. Well, all of the city-owned streetlights are LED. That was something that we prioritized. The remainder of city streetlights are actually owned by NV Energy. So here we are in a position where we have to collaborate with them, make sure that they're on a path that gets us there by 2025. And if they're not, how do we move that needle faster? And so there's a lot of sort of collaboration and efforts like this. And then increasing distributed renewable energy generation 15% by 2025 and increasing energy storage. So that's why we went through that Soul Smart process, was to just kind of get a baseline and get an understanding of how well we were doing on encouraging renewable energy and energy storage. And then how do we expand it other than saying, hey, put it on your rooftop, or doing it ourselves? So we've been looking at things like, can we lease space to the utility? Can we lease space to certain communities? So just kind of trying to think more outside the box on how you grow that effort when you're a little bit limited. And if you know about the market in Nevada, there is no meter aggregation. You can't have one large solar project and benefit multiple properties. So that gets even harder. So you have to get pretty creative. Priority number 3, green building. We do have a energy benchmarking policy in the city that requires all buildings 30,000 square feet and above, with the exception of certain industrial, manufacturing, and agricultural structures, to report to the city every year their energy and water use. We just put out our energy benchmarking report a couple of weeks ago. That's on our website on reno.gov/sustainability. And on the left-hand bar, you can see our energy and water efficiency program, and you can find the report there. And then increasing energy code compliance rates. A couple of years ago, actually, I say a couple of years ago, it was 2019. We went through the process of kind of doing a baseline of where is more training needed, where are we deficient on energy codes being complied with. And one of those was in commissioning. And so we worked with a vendor to develop a really comprehensive guide and checklist and start to work on how we grow the workforce around building commissioning. So that's still in process, but that guide is used today. It's been used for about the last 3 years. And then creating low carbon neighborhoods, really just creating vibrant walkable centers that host a mix of uses. That's done usually through the land development code or our Title 18. So what we're doing right now with Title 18 is, if some of you followed this before, we tried to have a sustainability section in the last update that did not make it. So what we're doing now is we're looking at the code again through the lens of where can we add more sustainability pieces or alternatives or equivalents, and push those through more as like not such a big deal, just something that people should be doing, that we should be doing. An example I'll give you is we have a landscaping requirement. We want to put in there that you can meet that landscaping requirement through a green roof, for example. So that's the steps that we're taking now, is through this next sort of cleanup. We are going to have some of those features in that update that's going to go before council, where you'll have more of those trade-offs. And then when we do the full update, we will readdress a new section to the update to put in some more rules. And then, of course, expanding the use of shared micromobility alternatives. We have the scooters downtown. That's not a box that's checked. That doesn't mean we've solved the problem. But it starts to change the mindset of our citizens and our businesses on kind of how you can move about the downtown and midtown areas. Priority number 5, towards zero waste. Improve communications about waste reduction and recycling to residents and businesses. What we see is certain, certain groups of individuals are less likely to recycle than others. Well, that could be a language barrier. That could be they don't have space for a bin. And so we're actually working with the state right now on a new grant for education. And we're trying to partner with them to address some of those specific areas that we see deficiencies where we see we could do better. And then increasing the number of multifamily and commercial buildings that subscribe. Again, that goes back to, is it a space issue? Just education? Is it a language barrier? And so really trying to not only increase recycling, but I would also add working with the community to produce or create less waste in the first place. And then priority 6, our urban forest, develop an implementation plan to guide. My editing there got a little off, so I apologize for that, but developing an implementation plan to guide tree planting activities. I would say that's something that is continuously in progress. We might develop a plan and say, oh, these are priority planting areas. We developed a series of heat maps and said, this is where we should be focusing our efforts. And then a year goes by and that changes, or new data comes out, or it's a new process for evaluating those areas. So this is something that kind of is constantly evolving. And we did just recently apply to be a NOAA study area, where through citizen science, citizens actually go out and start to collect this data so we can get a better idea of really truly our hot areas in Reno and where we should be focusing our efforts. And then adopting best practices in tree planting. I have the tree protection ordinance on there, and if any of you are familiar with that process, that has been put on hold. So that's another one where we're looking at, do we break that up? Do we address that in other ways? Do we look at it through a different lens? And I think the direction we're leaning now with that is more maybe through an equity lens. Now that we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer, can we kind of start to filter some of these efforts through a different lens and change the narrative and change the story around why we're doing it? And then the last one I'm going to go over is our priority number 8, which is safeguarding our water resources. Protecting the Truckee is, of course, a priority. It's a priority to the mayor. We work closely with One Truckee River. In fact, I have another check-in call with their executive director here coming up. But that's really just, where can we collaborate? Whose wheelhouse does it fall into? And then if you've been following what we've been doing with our utility services division, we are expanding the use of wastewater. We participate in a project called the One Water Nevada project, and that was looking at recycling affluent water for other uses. So there's all these pieces when you think of water. It involves multiple departments. It involves multiple processes. Some of them are very expensive processes. So I'm going to just go over really quick our recent Lead for Cities effort to kind of frame now maybe the direction that we're going. Some of the areas we did really well in Lead for Cities was transportation and land use, energy and greenhouse gas emissions, and quality of life. So in all those areas, we scored quite well. And that's really looking at per capita miles traveled, overall renewable energy and emissions reductions in the city. And then the quality of life credit is anything from trend improvements. So are we seeing less incidences of heart disease, diabetes? Are we promoting sort of equitable access? And I have a map I'm going to show you on kind of the reframing and thinking again on that equity piece and that access piece and how we can do better. So some of our gaps, green building policies and initiatives, we really only have our benchmarking policy. Light pollution reduction, that's something we haven't really even talked about too much at the city. We lack compact mixed use transit oriented development, and then just an overall lack of tracking charging stations in the city, and then expanding that footprint. Some other ones were, excuse me. I'm getting over being sick like everybody else. So water efficiency, we were quite high in per capita water use. And if any of you know the structure of Truckee Meadows Water Authority and kind of how they manage water, they focus on water waste, but they don't have a real comprehensive program on like, we need to use less water. So we didn't do very well there. And then lacking data regarding low impact development. Waste management was another one. We were very high on our per capita waste generation and low on our diversion. So that's definitely an area that we need to focus. And then materials and resource management, again, fell kind of in that waste management category. So I added this slide because this Lead for Cities exercise, one of the requirements that we had was access. So is access equitable? And that could be to parks, schools, hospitals. I picked the map of grocery stores here, but what they wanted us to do was look at different block groups and look at the radius of access to these community or to either community access or access to like grocery stores. And that got me thinking on how we are planning, and maybe we should start looking at things more through this equity lens. And for example, rather than say, this is how many bike lanes, this is how many miles of bike lanes we should have in the city, we should be saying, does everybody have access to these three things within a 5-minute walk? So whether that's they walk there, they walk to a bus station, they ride a bike somewhere. So maybe looking at things more through the equity and access lens more than we have done in the past. And then another piece is the recognition that climate change is already happening. We have things already happening, and how can we be more resilient, and how can we have more of a, not only a sustainability focus, so planning now kind of for far into the future, but addressing our needs now. And I would say we're doing a pretty good job with that, with our wildfire mitigation, our vegetation management, our emergency preparedness, and then also addressing our critical infrastructure. And all of these things together address those chronic and societal institutional inequities like affordable housing, homelessness, business retention, transportation, that we're making sure that we're going to continue to be strong into the future. And this one is just a statistic that over 55% of the world's population lives in urban areas. And according to the UN, that's going to increase to 68% by 2050. And so cities really are the hubs for making sure that we're taking action today on our transportation sector, on our buildings, reducing reliance on fossil fuels, looking at alternative modes of transportation, reducing reliance on natural gas. And that action needs to start today, considering statistics like this. And I think this is actually my last slide. But what can we do to start to move the needle and start to make change? Well, through strategic planning, master planning, taking a good look at the utility agreements that we have with waste management, NV Energy, where do we have opportunity there? Building codes, incentivizing action, and then programs that specifically help the community maybe take action. And that's it. I'm happy to take some questions. And I apologize again for losing my voice, but
You did fantastic, Suzanne. Thank you so much. I know we have 3 comments in the chat so far, 3 questions in the chat so far. I can read the first to you from Michelle if you'd like, and that way it's audible for folks who may be listening later on YouTube. So Michelle writes, when is the full review of the building code likely to happen?
So just to clarify the question, do you mean, Michelle, the review of sort of figuring out where people are compliant or not, or do you mean adoption of like a new code?
I mean adoption of a new code.
Okay, so yes, so we did skip 2021. We are intending to adopt 2024. We are already hearing from some developers and things like that that they're very scared about that. And so what we're doing right now is we're doing an evaluation of the 2021 to try to get an idea of what the leap is going to be from 2018 to 2024, and then start to educate those developers now on what we anticipate. So we're really trying to get a head start on that one, as opposed to just adopting it, saying, here's all the changes. And so we are working on that as we speak. I'm actually just waiting kind of for that assessment from our development services team.
Thank you. And there was a second part to that question from Robin, who says, to hook on to Michelle's question, tell us more as to why sustainability did not get into the last code update.
So there were a couple reasons. Of course, there was some pushback from the development community, but there was also internal fear that if we were left responsible with understanding what percentage of something happened or how much recycled furniture was used, it would be a resource constraint on our staff. So at the very last minute, it was like, well, should we even have this, or should we just have these things that are mandatory, and then these things maybe if you get some sort of green building certification or something like that. It was a few pieces. And then the other one was I feel like when it's just one thing, it's very easy to just take that one thing out. And so I'd much rather see it kind of throughout our code, so that there's not that opportunity to just take the one thing out and do nothing.
Question from Alan. What is the city's thoughts and or positions regarding supporting national carbon pricing?
So I'm like, good way to answer this one. So I don't think, and I know it was in our sustainability plan, I don't think the city of Reno would take a position on it. And it's a little bit hard because there's other cities that have provided letters of support and things like that. Some of those cities have a very different dynamic in their community than we do. There is still fear of it driving up costs for maybe lower income persons. But I also just, I don't see it being something that like the mayor's going to come out and do some sort of support letter for. I just don't. I just think there's still that overall concern of the overall impact to everybody in the community, especially as we're talking about homelessness and affordable housing, and cities have to stretch a lot of resources very thin, and the priority is still on those other groups and those other issues. And I think that there's just this perception, whether it's correct or not, that there's a conflict there.
That kind of leads into, I think, Keith's question in the chat that says, Washoe County is also proceeding to establish a sustainability and climate action plan. What is the status of their effort, and how do the city and county programs interface?
So I've actually been helping the county with that for about the last year and a half. And one of the things that they had initially talked about was sort of an overall plan like we had. And I steered them away from that and told them to first prioritize their own operation, get that under control, and maybe put forth an operational sustainability or a strategic plan for operations, and then do some of their work in the community and put forth that larger effort. So what we've been doing really is I work very closely with them on having a louder voice, because I think it's necessary as you start to look at things like EV codes and stuff like that, that it's very hard when just one city's like out in front trying to do it. I think it has to be, those types of efforts have to be more regional. And so I think just getting them in the game, like I said, we talk a lot. We want to make sure we're not doing things that conflict. We want to make sure that we have a similar message. We actually have a statewide sustainability group that is Reno, Washoe, Clark, Henderson, Vegas. We welcome in others to just make sure that we're all sort of consistent I know we have different needs in the north and the south, but trying to get that more consistent voice, and more regional collaboration on some of these things that are a heavier lift.
Thank you. There's a question from Penny who says, how do you define sustainability, and on the recharging stations, who pays and how?
So
Two questions there. Big
yeah, I
one.
know. So defining sustainability, that shouldn't be a tough one. It's tough just in that I struggle with, maybe because I'm a one-woman show, but I do struggle with where I put my time. I really define it as taking steps now to ensure a safe, healthy future. But I also really think that we have to back up and talk about what is happening now and protect our residents from heat. And so I have a hard time with this lately. And I even have told my boss, like, we need to call me something different, because 50% of my time is sustainability and 50% of my time is more of the resilience focus. So that's a hard one. I'll have to think on that one a little bit more. But on the recharging stations, it varies. Some sites it's free, and it depends between public and private. Sometimes it's hard on the public side to put in like free charging, because we still get that pushback of, well, you don't put in free gas pumps, right? And people are going to say that. It's just, so it really depends. And so we've been trying to solve that. Like, we've been looking at public charging at both the police station and the Moana pool. And I think we've kind of worked that out. One of the things that I say is, yes, but on one side, we're saving a lot of money. We're saving taxpayers' dollars by taking XYZ step. And that's how we justify free charging or something like that, like putting them together. But it just really depends.
That's really interesting. And I just take a moment of personal privilege here, because the charging stations, I think, are a double-edged sword. We provide that as a benefit for free, because we're getting cleaner air, people aren't polluting as much, but then we don't have the funding coming from the gas tax for the infrastructure to put in things like charging stations, or to fund, new roads or pedestrian paths. So there's this really strange, how are we going to move forward with our infrastructure funding as we transition away from fossil fuels? So just throwing that out there for folks to chew on. There's a lot of questions in the chat, and I would love to get folks more involved and engaged and make this more of a discussion as opposed to a lecture. So if you want to come off mute and come on camera and join in as a discussion, feel free. I will continue to read the questions. So we have another from Robin who says, who or what are the roadblocks to sustainability and climate action within Reno and within the region?
I mean, sometimes it depends. Sometimes some of the roadblocks are just some existing policy that if you sit down and really reread it, you're like, well, that doesn't really make sense. It's actually, inhibiting the ability to do ABC. So it really depends. It's the ability really to, like, using the tree ordinance, for example. It never really had a foundation behind it of like what we're trying to change. And as we've started to talk about it internally, I said, well, we could talk about it through the sustainability lens. Well, we kind of already have, so maybe we talk about health impacts and equity, and we re-message it and reframe it. And so I think the roadblocks are sometimes it's our own policies or state level or policies. It's definitely the cost of construction. A lot of people seem to think that sustainability means development. It doesn't. And that's why we have our building performance standard policy. 80% of existing buildings are still going to be here in 2050. So it's not just new development. And so I think it's just engaging the right people, looking at policy, making sure you have clear messaging when you do have some of the pushback. But I would say in the last 5 years, we've come a long way. Even the city has taken a much stronger stance on prioritizing some of these efforts.
Thank you. There's some more questions in the chat. The sustainability, I think, really got people's attention. So there's another from Michelle who says, what plans or ideas does the city of Reno have for using some of the new grant money that's now available through the Inflation Reduction Act for cities through direct pay?
So there's grants. There's some money there's rebates. The direct pay is in lieu of tax credits, which is great because there's certainly an incentive there now to do projects and own them. Put the money in, own them, get that direct pay. So there's a few different avenues, but we do have a newly formed infrastructure and funding committee, which I'm actually a part of. Some of that money is for things much bigger than I even understand. I'm not an engineer, civil engineer, so it's roadway projects, bridges. It's looking at bridges because of flooding issues. There's a lot of money, and we're actually still kind of trying to wrap our minds around it. The other problem is, well, I shouldn't say it's a problem. It's just something we're working on. Is it can't all just sit with me. I can't go, hey, there's one for solar. I'm going to go ahead and take all my time to put in this application for federal funding. There has to be other departments that are helping out. And I think we're just kind of mapping out right now who those other departments are, and making sure we take full use of everything that's available. Some of the efforts we've already started to just partner. We're not taking a lead. So it's definitely priority. It's definitely top of mind. And we're building those plans right now on how to make sure we maximize it.
I'm going to attempt this question from Robin. I think I know what you're getting at here, where you say, can you gauge the interest in sustainability by the general Reno population? So I think you're asking if you've done any kind of polling, or if you know how interested overall the city of Reno population, not just the city employees and staff, are in sustainability.
We haven't done like an overall survey. What we have found with surveys, and I'll take the micromobility project, for example, when people like it, they don't tend to take the survey. So that would be, but as far as the engagement by the community, I would say it really used to be like 70-30, 70 against 34. And I would say it's moving much more in the direction of 50-50, especially as we start to change that messaging and start to look at it a little bit different. And I'll give an example. I did an interview the other day on Lead for Cities, and the reporter said, oh, well, what should I do for some B-roll? Should I look at some solar and some scooters? And I said, no. Lead for Cities is so much more than that. I said, get a shot of the truckee, get a shot of a park, get a shot of some people walking or exercising, or we don't, because when people think it's just about like solar, or I think it brings out the naysayers a little bit more than if they start to realize there's so much more behind it. And so I think just as we've gotten better about that messaging, and our communications team has gotten better about how they promote some of these efforts, I think that's starting to change.
I think that leads into Brian's question too. They write, is there a perception that climate change hurts the most vulnerable the most? This is in response to the idea that carbon fee will hurt the vulnerable. So
I would say yes, there's a perception that it hurts unhoused, the elderly, those that are already ill, children with, asthma, things like that. I think there's certainly that perception that that's who is hurting. And I get what you're saying in response to the carbon fee. That's more so of, we all know what has been said, that it will drive up costs of things. It will promote, EV, solar, other things, but it will drive up cost of things that these sort of vulnerable populations are more reliant on. And we haven't quite figured out how to transition somebody over to a different way of thinking. And so I think, yes, that I don't know if that answered your question or not, Brian, but that's still the perception.
Let me just say one more thing about that, Suzanne. What I guess I'm wondering is the piece that seems to be missing from that discussion is the idea of a dividend back to the people. And I'm just wondering if you're aware of that, and then if others that are discussing it in the city are aware of that. That's the intended solution to that problem, is to give money back to the most vulnerable or the ordinary citizen.
Right. And I think it's hard for a city because typically you look at your data and your history to come to those sorts of assumptions. So I'll use the example of programs that we have for addressing high costs and homelessness and things like that. We had a program of free money and it was advertised daily, and they hardly spent any of it. Like nobody.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, if there's money back, it's still like figuring out how you move that up in the list of priorities. Like, if you get this money back, you can do XYZ with it and reduce your costs. And I just think that analysis and that framing isn't there yet.
Okay, thank you.
Another question from Keith: is there citizen involvement oversight of the sustainability program through the Planning Commission or another advisory committee?
So the latter part of your question, I've actually asked myself that. We have a Access Advisory Committee, the Senior Citizens Committee. We have all these different. We don't have one for whatever you want to call it, Sustainability Committee, and so I think we tend to use like the Planning Commission and those bodies to sort of gauge our efforts. There's no oversight other than our city council, but with certain activities, our council might require I go to the Planning Commission, or I go to the Access Advisory Committee, or one of those other bodies. They don't have a ruling. They don't get to say yay or nay, but they can at least provide feedback. But I've asked myself, actually, I was the same question, that if we prioritize it, is it time for maybe a group like that?
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I don't know if you're very familiar with the UU community, but we do love ourselves a good committee and are very fond of forming them for any discussion topic at any time. So I think, I can't speak for all of us, but I do know that we tend to show up when these committees happen. And then Michelle says, huge congratulations for becoming a LEED Gold certified city. Is the city targeting platinum? If so, what would be the next steps?
I think there's two things running in parallel. As they're going to come out with a new version of LEED. So we did certify under the latest version 4.1. So I think when they come out with a new version, you kind of look at it and say, okay, do we want to go for this other version, and do we also want to go for platinum? If they don't come out with a new version, do I want to go for platinum under the existing version? So I think that's sort of a something I have to evaluate. But the steps would really be, there were some credits where I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. It's so detailed and so strict. I mean, it's a very specific percentage of a thing that, and following a very like prescripted maybe pathway for something, or it's things we've never even talked about in this community. So I think it can help frame those next steps. Platinum would be a huge lift from where we are now. So maybe another 5 years or something, we look at it. But I would certainly like to see it happen. And when we got gold, I was like, well, platinum's next, but there's a lot that has to happen between now and then. And it's not just like adopting one specific policy. It's in like, and I'm looking at the scorecard just to get an idea. It's let's see, somewhere where we didn't get any points. We got some points in almost everything. Stormwater management, whatever their standard was for stormwater management, that involves our utility services department, that involves the sewer department. So that's a huge lift, and that's not something I can do alone. So I do think we can start to look at all those different credit categories and determine what we would have to do. And one of them we already started doing that we didn't get any points for, but I was like, why are we doing this? Was tracking our construction and demolition waste. We have it in our plan that will reach a goal, but we weren't tracking it. And then it opened up the conversation around the gentleman I was working with in our public works department said, well, how do we how do we do better? And I said, well, maybe we put in our RFP that you have to have a ESG and it has to lay forth this certain information, or you have to have the ability to report these types of things to us. I mean, maybe we start to look at it that way and go bigger than just tracking it, and so I think it opened up the door to start to have some of those conversations to specifically address some of those deficiencies.
Can you define ESG for me really quick?
Yeah, it's environmental. Somebody tell me the S. And the last one's governance. All of a sudden I'm drawing a blank.
I think it's social,
Yes,
environmental,
that's it.
social.
Yes, you're right.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So like an additional form of paperwork. Okay.
Yeah.
Another question came in from Robin. Do you feel all the various entities, City of Reno, Washoe County Planning Commission, WCRGB, County of Sparks are playing together with the same interests and goals?
Sort of.
Yeah, that's tough. Robin, loaded question.
Yeah, it is. I'm like, I will say what I've seen in the last year and a half, more than ever before, is those entities reaching out and saying, this is a question we're getting, this is what we're thinking, what are you guys doing? And they may tell me they don't like it, they don't like the thing, or I might say this is a thing we should do together, and they might say we don't like that thing. But I think there's at least more communication between those bodies, or those entities. Sparks has been a tough one for me to reach. If anybody has any contacts over there, I welcome them, but what they tend to do really is kind of wait to see what we're going to do, and then they start to evaluate if it's something they should do. But I would like it to be more collaborative. In certain things it is. So yeah, I'm like, that's the answer to that one. Yeah.
Some barriers to that. I see. There's no other questions coming up in the chat right now. I guess I would ask if you have any ideas on what we as individuals can do to kind of reduce our impact on climate and waste. Can we collect rainwater? Can we recycle our own gray water? Can we compost? What can we do as individuals while the city and county are going together?
Yes, no, yes. No, I'm just kidding. Compost, like things like that. If you do compost, it's challenges. One of the things that and Kendra at Waste Management would probably hate me right now if she knew I was saying this, but one of the things we're trying to stand up is actually a green waste recycling program. We're hoping it will be out by the spring. But we have to look at the barriers that individuals do have and see if we can kind of get more creative on how we address those. So composting is definitely an issue if you don't have the space, if you don't have the knowledge, if you don't have, well, yeah, and because we have this huge push kind of for multifamily living, now we're in a whole nother space with things like that. So I think as community members, education is really important. If it's something you're interested in, get educated on it. I recognize a lot of names here. I get a lot. I'm always open to emails and calls. And waste, I think, is a huge issue in our city. If you can do anything to just use less stuff, recycle more, that's certainly where I would start. But with all of it, use less water. I mean, just be aware of your own impact.
Thank you. We did get one last question from Jackie. Oh, a lot coming in. I take my compost to Whole Foods. Is that a great idea? Is that a good idea?
I don't know what they do with it. I don't know if anybody knows, but I don't know where they take it. If somebody knows, I'd love to hear about it, but and I should probably reach out to them and ask them where they take it.
Fantastic. And Jackie said she'll ask next time she's there.
Yeah.
Lots of thank yous coming into the chat, so I hope you get a chance to read those. Robin asked, should I reconsider my opinion of quote unquote developers? Robin coming in with the loaded questions early on a Sunday. And Jackie says full circle is the composting. From the husband says full circle does the composting at Whole Foods.
So, and that's why I was asking, because Full Circle, and now I don't know the volume of what they get at Whole Foods, but I know that Full Circle doesn't take a lot of food waste. So I do kind of wonder sometimes if it all goes there. I mean, and that's unfortunately the only place, other than if like a farm's willing to take it or something, that will take it. And that's actually another huge problem here, is because we don't have the policy that promotes that kind of development to create a new composting facility or something like that. We just don't have a lot of those things here to do stuff like composting.
And Penny has some ideas on EV charging stations to get a monthly recharge card to go on the slot to activate recharging. So Penny is throwing out ideas on how we can charge folks and get that infrastructure funding so we can fund other things.
Yep. And again, it really goes back to who hosts that charging station, and then can you generate revenue on it? There was actually an issue, and it was cleared up a few years ago through the PUCN process, but there used to be a thing where if you hosted a charging station and you were giving people electricity, you were a utility. And so they wanted to start, so they did clean that up a few years ago, but it just depends on who hosts it.
Mm-hmm. And Robin wants me to re-ask, should I reconsider my opinion of developers?
I don't know, because I don't know what your opinion is now, but I think I've had a lot of conversations with developers, and I try to be a fairly balanced person, and I hear what they're saying. And because a developer is often developing something and then turning it around for another purpose, we haven't closed that gap on like, you spend all the money to do the thing, and then does it actually benefit the end user, because now it's in the hands of somebody else. I get what they're saying. I get what they say on the cost. I get what they say on what's marketable. But then there's some that just want to do the right thing. And I just think, and they're willing. I just think it's all about keeping them in the loop throughout these processes and changes, and making sure we're providing the education. We're getting there.
Penny asks, where do grocery stores compost their green waste? I don't know if you know the answer to that. We were just talking about Whole Foods accepting compost.
Yeah, I mean, their own waste, unfortunately, a lot of it's thrown away, unless a grocery store has a relationship with Full Circle, because again, that's the only place. They're probably throwing it away. They're probably not composting it.
Tough. And Doro says, I need money to hire a person to collect recycling. Well, I think we are about out of time today. Suzanne, you have been wonderful. Thank you for your presentation and taking the time out of your Sunday to sit with us and talk about waste and waste reduction and what the city of Reno is doing, and all of the questions that came in today. I hope everyone is feeling recharged and ready to get out there and reduce waste. So yes. A tough message in the Christmas season.
Yeah. Those are the times you have to think about it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. I hope to see you at the 10:30 service today. It's hybrid, so you can join on Zoom, or you can pop over to UUFNN in person if you are fully vaccinated and or want to wear a mask. So I will see you all later today. Suzanne, have a great rest of your day, and thank you again. We hope to see you back soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Hi, Alex.